The Tragedy of the Weeping Bride Tunnel, a true haunting documentary. Subscribe if you dare, because the dark remembers names. Like, comment, and keep your light on. Rain hammered Ontario the night a jogger called 911 from the rail path near the Weeping Tunnel. The dispatcher heard breath, the crunch of gravel, and a thin, steady crying that didn't match the caller's voice. Then the line went silent. Minutes later, officers found his phone at the tunnel mouth, wet and cracked, the camera lens fogged by condensation. Footprints led in, none let out. The tunnel exhaled cold air, and even the police spoke in whispers. What really happened in there? To understand the fear, you have to know the place. The tunnel is a short stone throat beneath a retired rail line, 3 kilometers from the noise of Niagara Falls. Locals call it the Weeping Tunnel because water beads on the ceiling and drops in slow teardrops, tapping the floor like a metronome. Teenagers dare each other to walk it at night. Hikers avoid it after rain. Old families pass down a softer rumor that a bride died nearby more than a century ago on her wedding day. But when you ask for proof, the details break apart like wet paper. People mention names at kitchen tables and a date scratched into stone, yet no official record survives. Over the last decade, investigators, weekend teams, and seasoned techs brought thermometers and high-gain mics. Nothing proved the supernatural, but the audio was odd. Layered echoes, a sob that slipped onto recordings when the tunnel looked empty by eye and ear. A professor in St. Catharines said it was limestone geometry and drip rhythm, the tunnel copying human sounds back at us. Others weren't so sure. The jogger's case pushed it from folklore to urgent. Searchers swept both ends, mapped the culvert, and dragged the thin stream beneath the floor. They found gravel, a rusted knee, ale, and an old metal hair comb caught in a seam of rock. Then they checked a motion-sensing wildlife camera mounted by a conservation group. One new clip. 03:14 a.m. A lone figure enters the tunnel, hood up, head bowed. The camera never logs an exit. The search for the jogger became a local obsession within days. News crews parked near the trail, volunteers formed human chains along the embankment, and police kept quiet about the details they couldn't explain. What unsettled people most wasn't the disappearance. It was the crying. Multiple searchers reported hearing the same faint sobbing from inside the tunnel. Not loud, not frantic, soft, controlled, like someone trying not to be heard. Each person described it slightly differently, but every account ended the same way. When they moved closer, the crying stopped. Locals began sharing older stories again, ones usually kept to late-night conversations. There was talk of a wedding in the late 1800s, a runaway carriage, or a drowning near the tracks. No two versions matched. Some people whispered that the bride's name had been Margaret. Others said Emily. A retired librarian claimed she once saw a yellowed newspaper clipping mentioning a ceremony gone wrong. But she couldn't find the clipping today, not in her home, not in the archives, not in any digital record. It was as if the past didn't want to be traced. Meanwhile, investigators studied the wildlife camera footage closely. The figure entering the tunnel was slender, wearing dark running clothes. The faint reflection of a bib-style fabric suggested it truly was the missing jogger. But the footage had one problem: a timestamp skip. The recording froze for 2.5 seconds. When the video resumed, the figure was closer to the center of the tunnel. But their posture was wrong. They appeared to be turned sideways, head lifted slightly, as if listening to someone standing very near. Yet the tunnel, in the footage, was otherwise empty. One detective suggested that maybe the jogger had met someone inside, someone who walked through the tunnel earlier and wasn't caught on camera. The conservation group disagreed. The path to the tunnel had only one camera, and it had recorded no one else. 7 days after the disappearance, a hiker found something new. At the far end of the tunnel, pressed against the damp stone wall, lay a single white shoe, still laced, perfectly clean, as if it had just been placed there. The leather was dry, untouched by rain, and tucked inside the shoe was a folded piece of old paper. It held only one handwritten word. Wait. The discovery of the shoe changed everything. Police increased patrols, and news coverage shifted from a missing person case to something far stranger. Specialists analyzed the paper found inside the shoe. It wasn't modern. The fibers matched the kind used in stationery from the early 1900s. The ink was iron gall, the type that fades brown with age. Yet the word written on it, wait, looked fresh, as if penned that same morning. No explanation made sense. Local historians were asked to help. One of them, a woman in her 70s named Helen Wakefield, hesitated before agreeing to speak. She had grown up just a few miles away, and she said her grandmother used to warn children about the tunnel. When pressed, Helen revealed something the town rarely spoke of anymore. There had been a real bride. Her name, she said, was Clara Whitcomb. She had been married in 1901 at a church not far from where the rail line once ran. After the ceremony, Clara and her husband walked the path along the tracks, planning to cross beneath the tunnel on their way to a carriage road. They never made it. A storm hit. The details became uncertain after that. Some said an accident. Some said she slipped. Some said she was found. Some said she never was. Helen's voice trembled when she explained why the story faded. The records from that time, including wedding announcements, death notices, and property listings for the Whitcomb family, all disappeared in a courthouse fire the same year. The only proof of Clara's existence was a single blurry photograph in a private album passed down in Helen's family. In it, a young woman stands in a simple gown near the railway. Her expression is peaceful, but her eyes look somewhere just past the camera, as if distracted by something no one else could see. When investigators asked Helen if they could scan the photo, she agreed. The high-resolution sky and revealed something unnoticed for generations. In the far darkness behind the bride, deep within the mouth of the tunnel, there was the faint shape of a second figure. No face, no details, only a silhouette watching her. And when they compared that silhouette's outline to the still frame of the jogger in the recent footage, the match was nearly identical. The photograph changed the tone of the investigation. What had once been a missing person search was now treated like a historical puzzle layered with a present-day mystery. Police did not publicly release the image, but whispers spread fast in small towns. People began driving to the tunnel at night, some out of curiosity, others looking for signs of the jogger. Within a week, authorities had to block off the path. It only made the place feel more forbidden. Meanwhile, the wildlife camera was checked again. The conservation team retrieved older backups, footage from months before the disappearance. That's when they found something deeply unsettling. At least 6 different clips showed people entering the tunnel. Hikers, teenagers, a couple taking photographs. Every one of those videos showed them walking in. Only some showed them walking out. Occasionally the camera would record a person emerging hours or days later, though their pace seemed slower. Posture hunched, eyes unfocused. None of them ever reported being missing. None of them recalled staying inside that long. When asked, they simply insisted that the camera must be wrong. Investigators began interviewing those individuals. Their answers were oddly similar. Each one remembered hearing something faint, like humming or someone quietly breathing nearby. Not threatening, not demanding, just present. One man described it as someone trying to speak but underwater. Another said it felt like he wasn't alone, but whoever was there didn't want to hurt him. They all used the same word to describe it, even though they had never spoken to each other. Lonely. The team returned to Helen, the historian. When told about the recordings, she closed her eyes for a long time. Then she said the story her grandmother told her had one detail she hadn't shared yet. Clara Whitcomb wasn't found for 3 days after the storm. Hen they discovered her, She was sitting inside the tunnel, dress soaked, bouquet ruined, staring straight ahead. She was alive, but she didn't speak. Not then, not ever again. She lived another 32 years, silent to the end. Helen said she believed Clara hadn't died in the tunnel. Helen believed Clara never left it. And on the night she said those words, the crying returned, so soft and steady that search teams could hear it from the road. The crying that night drew dozens of people back to the tunnel. Some stood at the barricades. Others remained in their cars with engines running. No one wanted to walk closer, but no one wanted to leave either. The sound was clear, steady, and strangely calm. Not a scream, not a sob of panic. It was the kind of crying that comes from someone who has waited far too long. Police formed a perimeter and warned everyone to step back. Yet the crying continued, echoing down the stone in slow, rhythmic pulses. A search team was authorized to enter one last time. They moved slowly, flashlights cutting thin beams through the darkness. The air inside held that same cold, damp stillness, like a basement sealed for decades. Halfway through the tunnel, the team stopped. The crying had changed. It wasn't coming from ahead or behind. It was coming from the walls. The sound vibrated softly, as if the stone itself remembered the voice. Near the center, they found something new lying on the ground. Not a shoe, not clothing. A small silver locket, tarnished from age. Inside was a faded photograph of a young woman in a plain white gown, Clara Whitcomb. The image matched Helen's family photo, but here, the bride looked directly into the camera. Her expression was neither happy nor fearful. It was patient. Moments later, radios crackled. Officers stationed outside the tunnel had spotted movement at the far end, a lone figure stepping out into the rain. Everyone rushed to the exit. The figure was the missing jogger. He wasn't injured. He wasn't confused. He simply looked exhausted, as though he had been awake for days. When asked where he had been, he said he never left the tunnel. He said he heard someone walking beside him the entire time. Not threatening, not violent, just walking, keeping him company. He remembered one thing clearly. A voice, barely above a whisper, saying, "No one should be alone." Today, the Weeping Bride Tunnel is sealed, covered in steel and concrete. But locals say that after heavy rain, if you stand near the old railway path and listen very closely, you can still hear soft footsteps and someone quietly crying, somewhere just beyond sight. If this story unsettled something inside you, you're not ready for the next one. Subscribe before the dark remembers your name.